It started out with things like scammer or thief posts saying that I had stolen some database and I wanted 200,000 US to give it back. But then it started to progress. And I think by about 2018, they then became more a pedophile, you're members of these sexual deviant organizations. So when I actually saw her photo on the blog, it was like a lightning bolt. It all came together that it made sense it was her. I'm Guy Babcock, and this is my story of being the victim of an online attack campaign, calling me a scammer, a thief, a pedophile. End of September of 2018, I got a call from my father in Canada, and he was very upset. He's part of a social club for seniors, and quite a few of the directors of this club had got an email saying that, did you know that you have this person in your club whose sons are on the internet and they're both pedophiles? So I immediately then went to my computer and I started searching my name, and just tens, if not 100, different links came up. And so you'd have all of these pictures which clearly were stolen from my Facebook or LinkedIn account, and then someone had written, thief or pedophile or whatever on top of the picture. So it just jumped right out at you as soon as you looked at it. I remember it being just overwhelmed when I first looked at this. I felt, completely helpless, because I just couldn't think of, how can I possibly get rid of this? How can I possibly answer something like this? People, can look at the sites and say, well, it's maybe doesn't look right, or it looks a bit fake. But the point is, there's always a doubt in the back of their mind. And I couldn't imagine how I was going to deal with it at that time. I searched for myself, and I'd search for my brother, because we were both mentioned in the original email. I then started searching immediately other family members, and basically was able to ascertain that it was 11. There's somewhere around 640 posts that we've identified against me. The posts started in 2016, so they'd actually been up about 2 years. The posts with my family members were of a similar pattern. The women were all thieves or scammers, and the men were all labeled as pedophiles. Within about 10 days of this coming up, I got a call from a close friend of ours from the village we used to live in, basically saying that someone in the village had approached him to say, did you know this is on the internet? So actually my worst nightmare came true within 10 days. It caused a lot of stress for me at that point, because I'm thinking, they're also checking up on me. Am I going to be refused a mortgage? This actually did occur to my brother in Canada. They actually, when they went for a mortgage, actually got refused a few times with no explanation, which there was no reason. And finally, I think it was the third mortgage lender actually called them and said they had found the stuff online and wanted to know about it. The way I was actually able to figure out who's behind the post, I decided to basically search my name and look at every single link in the first 50 pages. And as I went through and I got farther down, I eventually came across a comment on a blog. It had a fake name, but it actually had a photo of the poster. And when I looked at the photo, I realized that I knew the person, and it was Nadir Atas. That was basically sort of a defining moment. I still can remember that very vividly, because when I actually came across it, I basically sat there in shock for about a minute or two. She had actually worked for our family's business. We owned a real estate company, and she was a real estate agent. As time went on, we started to get more and more complaints about her from other agents, and eventually in 1993, we terminated her contract with the company after finding some irregularities. She had called and threatened my father, and we had created a police report. Several years later, when my mother died, not long after, family members received letters in the post saying horrendous things about my mother and her death. But when this actually came up, I think, although I maybe for a second thought of her because of the similarity to the attacks by letter, it had been so long. I mean, we're talking, more than 20 years ago. I just dismissed it because, why would someone, come back 20 some years later and attack you. It just didn't make sense. So when I actually saw her photo on the blog, it was like a lightning bolt. It all came together that it made sense it was her. Once I'd traced that, I then searched that person's name and came across a blog by a lawyer in Toronto. And reading the blog, I realized that she and her family had been attacked in the same manner that we were. And once we contacted her, we actually then found out that there was, in fact, many victims. At the moment, we're aware of 150 victims, but I suspect the number is actually higher than that. We began a legal lawsuit against her in October of 2018. We only had a judgment of our court case a couple of weeks ago, so it's been 2.5 years since we began the legal process. Once we got involved legally in a lawsuit to try and get this stopped, that then the posts have just increased exponentially, particularly this last autumn. It's only now that we've finally been able to get the police to engage and arrest her. I also went to Google, but I have to say that the process was extremely frustrating. I even got an email back at one point where they said they would consider removing the links, but would I please provide when I got out of jail and what the conditions of my release were. At which point I went ballistic and said, this is the reason why I'm asking for it to be removed. I'm not the criminal, I'm the victim. One of the problems that I've got as far as getting posts removed is that the posts were put on websites that are in America. These sites are basically pay to remove. I call them extortion websites. They allow people to post whatever they want with little to no verification of the poster. And then if you ask to get it removed, they basically hide behind Section 230, which basically means that the publisher isn't liable for what's posted. However, if you pay them a fee, sometimes the fee was quoted as high as $2,000 US, they'll consider removing the posts. If I was in the same room with her, I would probably just ask her why she has so much hatred for everyone. People can have a tough life. We all have things that we have to deal with, but to lash out, particularly against people she didn't know and had never met, something's definitely wrong here and it needs to change. Because in my case, it's clearly illegal. In Canada, it's clearly illegal what has been posted, and we have no mechanism really to get this removed without the large corporations deciding that they'll help us or not. And I don't think I should have to go begging to them to get this removed.